You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. Ian, as always, it's great to have you here in the studio.
Well, good evening, Daniel, and good evening to all your listeners. It's a lovely evening, isn't it? Really nice and warm. Yeah, I've spent the day in the garden. I've got one of my hobbies is to restore. I probably haven't told you this. Restoring Second World War engines, and that's another story in itself. But yeah, one of my engines is actually at RAF Manston. But yeah, it's a long old story. I could go on all night. But one of them, this Lister, had a carburettor problem. So I've been fiddling around with that, and I've got a sore back. So I want to put some ointment on it. But I carry on regardless. Her Majesty's Coastguard, it just basically is a service of the government of the United Kingdom concerned with coordinating air-sea rescue, and Her Majesty's Coastguard is a section of the Maritime and Coastguard Agency responsible for the initiation and coordination of all civil maritime search and rescues within the UK Maritime Rescue region. And I think I've already pointed that out. That's, you're talking 10,500 miles of coastline in the UK, and you're talking about 1 million square nautical miles, because it extends at 1,000 miles out into the Atlantic by 1,000 miles. And really what we do is it includes the mobilisation, organisation and tasking of adequate resources to respond to persons in distress at sea, or to persons at risk of injury or death on the cliffs or shorelines in the United Kingdom. We have a Chief Executive Officer of the Maritime and Coastguard, which is Sir Alan Massey, and the operation control of the service is responsibility of the Chief Coastguard. Now, don't normally mention this, but we actually go back, our history goes back before 1829, because it comes through the Preventive Water Guard. But in 1829, the first Coast Guard instructions were published and dealt with discipline and directions for carrying out preventative duties. And they also stipulated that when a wreck took place, the Coast Guard was responsible for taking all possible action to save lives and to take charge of the vessel and protect the property. And to some extent, we still do a lot of that today. But the role of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, which is part of the Department of Transport, is for implementing the government's maritime safety policy. And that includes coordinating search and rescue at sea through Her Majesty's Coastguard and checking that ships meet UK and international safety rules and preventing coastal pollution. Now, typical emergencies to which the Coast Guard is summoned, and these are the sort of things that Sheppey Coastguard get involved in, is sailboarders too exhausted to reach the shore, walkers and animals who slip from cliff paths, boats losing rudder control, crews stranded aboard container ships battered by freak waves, medical emergencies, incidents involving fires such as oil rigs, suicide victims that have jumped from cliffs or bridges, missing adults and children around the cliffs or beach area, broken down merchant vessels in English waters, evacuating injured persons at sea, locating missing persons and vessels at sea, groundings and collisions at sea. And for that, we call upon a range of resources, including a number of helicopters, which you've probably seen now and again, flying around on the island.
I know you're next going to cover some useful safety advice for our listeners.
Yeah, there's actually four things really I want to cover. I mean, you've noticed today the weather's fine. I was having a little bike ride along the prom, and there's lots of people playing in the water. It was very calm, the water was. But, there are some simple guidelines for a safe day out at the coast, and these are the sort of things people should be looking at it. Check the weather and tides. Now, you can get this information from the web, coastal tourist information centres, your local accommodation, or your local shops. You can even get them from the lifeguards, which are situated at Sheerness, Minster, and at Laysdown. And take notice of the times for high and low water, so that if you explore the shoreline, you can get back before the tide comes in. And even driving up tonight, which is low water. I saw a lot of people right out in the distance. Now it is just on the turn, so that tide will be coming in now. So there is a potential for people to be trapped if they're not aware that the high water is, the water is actually coming in. And you need to pay particular attention to tides if you go onto sandbanks or into sea caves. Not that we have any on Sheppey, but certainly people do get cut off by the tides when they try and walk along Warden Bay, perhaps down to the Minster Leas, which you can do at low water. But if you don't do it at the right times, you can actually get cut off. Now, lifeguarded beaches and flags. Again, as I mentioned earlier, go to a lifeguarded beach if you can and follow the safety flags and advice of the lifeguards. A yellow and red flag shows the area of the beach that is patrolled by the lifeguards, and if you go down at Minster and Sheerness and Laysdown today, you would have seen a yellow and red flag. A plain red flag means that it's too dangerous to go into the water, and a black and white checkered flag marks the area kept aside for surfers. Not that we have surfers on this beach, but if you do see a checkered flag, that is for surfers. And an orange windsock means that there are dangerous wind conditions and you should not use inflatable toys or boats at sea. Now, in terms of swimming tides and currents, you're better off swimming or bodyboarding on a lifeguarded beach if you can and stay within your depth. Swim parallel to the shore, not going right the way out and coming all the way back in, because if the tide conditions are wrong, you can actually get swept out. And if you do get caught by a strong current or a rip tide, try to stay calm as you can and raise your hand and shout for help. Hold on to your surf or bodyboard if you have one, and if you can't get help, try and swim parallel to the beach until you're out of trouble, then swim up the shore. And if you can stand up, wade instead of swimming. Now, inflatable boats and toys, these are something we hate as coastguards. And I saw a number of people in inflatable toys today. Now, the wind conditions were an onshore breeze, so they weren't going to be blown away. But if the wet wind had turned, these people weren't tethered to the shore, and off they go. And we have to call out the lifeboats to get them, and hopefully get them and catch them alive. Now, we would rather you didn't use inflatable dinghies, toys and lilos, because the slightest breeze can blow them out to sea in seconds. However, if you do use one, attach it via a rope to an adult who is in the sea with you, and make sure that you are between the yellow and red flags on a lifeguarded beach. Now, not for us really, but many people have either died or been seriously injured after jumping into the sea from high places. We call it tombstoning, from cliffs, piers, harbour walls. You don't know what lurks under the water, and with changing tides, deep sea can become a shallow puddle. And every year people become paralysed because they're jumping from high heights into what is a very low water. And finally, particularly here on our cliffs and coastal walking, wear sturdy footwear and clothing, and take a mobile with you. If you take a dog, keep it on the lead at the top of the cliff and keep well away from the cliff edges, and don't climb up or down them, and stick to the marked pathways. And don't attempt to self-rescue people or pets from cliff edges. Just call 999 and ask for the Coast Guard. So those are the basic safety messages. And
we're talking to Ian Goodwin from the Sheppey Coastguard, and I think we've had a few questions come in.
We have. We've had 3 questions, or one answer and 2 questions. One of the chaps has asked Mr. Fawkes about boats have satellite navigation, so why did my TomTom not work on my boat yesterday? Well, it's very straight. The reason why your TomTom doesn't work on your boat, I'm sorry I'm laughing, but we have had incidents with people using TomToms. They are designed for the road. They're not actually designed for the they're not designed for use at sea. I mean, we have had people actually gone aground and saying they were using a TomTom and they were following the blue bits, and you can't do that. No, TomTom navigations are for road users, and it just highlight quite a few. Some people go to sea and they don't know a difference between a maritime chart and a road map, and people do take road maps and go to sea. I've even had one individual tell me he was following the A249 and went left instead of right, and it's just bizarre. When you're at sea, you're not following the A249. We've had a comment about, is it Pokemon Go, this game that's going on? No, we have not had any incidents yet with people running into the sea trying to capture Pokemons, but no doubt we will as time goes on. And Chris Gull, yes, that is what you've written is cold water shock. It's not something I can repeat over the airwaves, but you're absolutely correct in terms of that, and I'll expand a bit later on that a bit later. In terms of incidents, shall we go on to some of the incidents?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Is that okay? I mean, it's been a while since I was in here. It was probably towards the end of April, and so I'll start at the end of April. On Saturday the 30th of April, we had 2 incidents on this day. Now, Sheppey Coastguards were called to a man getting cut off by the tide at Minster Lees, just what I was telling you earlier on, and just as I've seen people this evening, and he was fishing on a sandbank, but he was okay and he made it back to shore safely. Later on that day, a person was seen in the water between Sea Salter and Shellness. Now, Whitstable Lifeboat, Herne Bay and Sheppey Coastguard teams were tasked to search the area, but no person was found. However, 2 jet skis were found aground and they were refloated by the lifeboat. Moving on to Monday the 2nd of May, that would have been a bank holiday, we were tasked to assist the Medway Coastguard team to search for a missing person. The person was found safe and well en route to the incident, and we were assigned to go to Copperhouse Lane on the River Medway as Rescue 163, which is what we call the new helicopter from Lydd, spotted an empty tender. The Sheerness lifeboat recovered the tender and no persons were found. At the end of that week, on Friday the 6th of May, at 12:30 in the afternoon, we searched for a broken down yacht in the Swale, and it was eventually located by the Herne Bay Coastguard team, but there was no casualties. Moving on to Thursday the 19th of May, again at midday, Sheppey Coastguard and the inshore lifeboat were called to reports of cries for help in Halstow Creek in the Medway estuary in the area of the Lower Halstow Yacht Club. Now, this is very significant in relationship to cold water shock in terms of what I'm going to say a bit later on. Now, the Coast Guard rescue helicopter was also launched on service. The lifeboat was on scene at about 12:30. This is in the early hours of the morning, and immediately launched 2 flares to illuminate the area to assist with the search, so we can set up 2 paraflares. Now, 2 persons wearing high-vis clothing were spotted in a dinghy adjacent to a mooring buoy where, after hearing calls for help, they had found an elderly male in the water. This person was clinging to a buoy, but they had been unable to get him out of the water, so called the emergency service for help. Now, the lifeboat crew member Chris White entered the water to assist the casualty, who it was believed had been in distress for approximately 2 hours, and it was extremely cold. Now, with assistance of 2 other members of the lifeboat crew, the casualty was taken on board the lifeboat and then taken ashore to the nearby slipway, where he was handed over to the Sheppey Coastguard and ambulance crew. Now, my colleague Scott Cruikshank commented that he noted that the casualty was wearing a life jacket, and this incident illustrates the importance of wearing one. Now, Scott was very clear, had the casualty not worn one, the outcome would have been tragic, and we're talking about someone who had been in the water for 2 hours, cold water, but was wearing a life jacket. Had they not, that they would have died. And the guy eventually, when he came to and he did another interview later for the papers, he acknowledged the fact that without that life jacket he would have died. We've already had a chap called Alan Mason who's got it absolutely spot on. I won't tell you exactly what he said, but it was spot on in terms of what cold water shock is. We've also had a few people Texas, are they?
Yes, yeah.
Someone's asked about he sees someone going around with a blue shirt on for the Coast Guard, but another one white shirt and gold epaulets on the island. Well, the blue shirts are the Coast Guard rescue officers who work on the Sheppey team. The chap who wears the white shirt with the gold braiding on is he's called a SCU, but I always refer to him as a sector manager, and that used to be our station officer Nigel Woolley, who's now effectively in charge of the sector. So he's in charge of both the Sheppey team, the Medway team and the Herne Bay team, and he will wear a white shirt because he's a full-time Coast Guard rescue officer with the gold sort of braiding, whereas we will just wear the blue shirt, which is the recognised for the Coast Guard rescue officers. Someone's also, what makes the tide go in and out? Well, quite simply, it's the relationship between the moon and the sun. Now, the moon actually goes round the Earth, and the Earth actually moves round the sun. Now, without going into the great details of all the neaps and spring tides and the equinoxes and where the Earth is in relationship to the sun, basically you have what's called first quarter. I'm going to get this completely wrong now. Opposition, last quarter, and conjunction, and those are the 4 phases of the moon as it rotates around the Earth, and it's basically that rotation around the Earth which gives the tides. And so as we see the moon coming away, we see the sun going around every 24 hours, and we get basically 2 high waters and 2 low waters every 6 hours. So in a 24-hour period, we'll have 2 highs and 2 lows. At the moment, it's low, round about, well, coming up. It's not low right now. It was low about 6 o'clock. It'll be high at 12, and as the moon keeps moving round us, it'll then go to 6 o'clock in the morning where it'll become low, and that'll just repeat itself. But it's slightly out.
No, I was going to say, which is, Professor Brian Cox does lots of different programmes. And he's doing one at the moment. I think episode 2, they really go into that.
That's right, all about
visuals.
That's right, all about the air. But it's just basically the gravitational pull of the moon. And for any of the physicists out there, the Newtonian formula is the force is equal to the product of the masses of 2 bodies divided by the distance squared between them, multiplied by the Newtonian gravitational constant. Now, you see, Daniel, I haven't done that since I was 18, and given the fact that I'm 58 now, that's come from the back of my mind after 40 years, the force and the Newtonian gravitational constants. But there you go. It's all to do with the Earth and the moon and its position and its the moon's gravitational pull on the tides. And finally, some delightful ladies, I presume they're ladies, from the knitting circle have said they will knit me some socks. Yes, you can knit me some socks, because in the winter time my feet do get cold, and I would like the colour blue with an extra gusset in on the heel, please, so to stop wear and tear. Okay, shall we carry on with our...
Yeah.
Okay, so on Friday the 10th of June at 6 p.m, Sheppey Coastguards were requested to go to Love's Beach at Laysdown, which is a private beach, to attend to a speedboat drifting off the shore. The speedboat managed to get ashore unaided. Well, he didn't. Someone else managed to get it across. It appeared that the owner forgot to put the bung in the vessel, so it filled up with water. So we passed on safety advice, as they had no bung, they had no radio, no life jackets, and no flares. So really, full marks for getting everything wrong on that occasion. On Sunday, the 19th of June, we did a training exercise in cliff rescue at Warden Springs. Not so much an incident, but something that we just want to mention, that we spent the day doing rope rescue methods, which are used to recover casualties who have fallen or are stuck on the cliffs. And the team worked together to lower a cliff rescue technician who assessed the casualty, in inverted commas, because it was we used our own. We used ourselves, and provided first aid treatment if necessary, and then recovered the casualty to the top of the cliff before transferring the casualty to the next level of care as required. Now, what we normally do, if we do recover a casualty from the cliff, we'll provide the assistance needed and make sure they get transferred to a place of safety. And we'll also provide support to the lifeboats and search and rescue helicopters tasked by the operational centres. And as my colleague, the station officer, Tim Judge, remarks, Tim's now the new station officer. I should have mentioned that earlier on, because Nigel's now the sector manager and Eamon French is the deputy station officer. And as Tim remarked, this training exercise highlighted the dangers involved in walking or working near cliff edges, particularly in wet or windy weather. It's something we practice on a regular basis throughout the year, and we would urge people to exercise extreme caution in these areas. Don't get too close to the cliffs, they can collapse, and this is particularly important in campsites along the north side of the island.
And we're continuing with those incidents, Ian.
Yeah, just to say we had a couple of more questions from Mr. Dio, who described correctly what cold water shock is. How do you get called out? We use a pager system, and basically we get called out from the Maritime Operations Centre persons who will wear the white shirts, and we as coastal operation persons, we will wear the blue shirts, and that's the sort of distinction between us. But we get paged and written. Is there enough work for full time? Well, a lot of maritime operation staff are full time, and James Crane's recently become a qualified maritime operation person, and he works down and at the National Maritime Centre in Farningham, down near Southampton, and he will, sometimes when we're doing these rescues now, we can hear James on the radio, which is a different change because he's still part of the team, but he works full time as in the Maritime Operations Centre. And is there enough work for full time? Well, yes, there probably is if you look at it from the point of view if you have a small team. But the reason why we have something like 11 or 12 is it's all the individual skills that people bring. It's the synergy of bringing all those skills together that the sum is greater than the sum of the individual parts, which is what synergy really means. And it's all of that which brings all the different diverse people on the team. In terms of the final sort of shouts, I just wanted to talk a bit about this weekend, because we've had a glorious weekend, and on Saturday the 16th of July we had we were tasked to the Hearty Ferry following a report of a vessel aground on Hall Sands, which is a very favourite place for seals to bask on. If you actually go down to the Hearty Ferry Inn and you look, if you're facing the swale and you look to your left, that's actually looking towards the east. There's a sandbank, so if you get your binoculars out, you will actually see seals on there. But on Saturday, you would have seen a vessel aground, and the person on board was fine and we're going to wait to refloat at high water. We were then tasked to Minster Leas following a report by the lifeguards of 3 persons on 3 kayaks in difficulties off the Leas. The inshore lifeboat was tasked, and 2 of them were taken back to the boathouse. 1 came ashore with a lifeboat man at the Leas, and they were cold and tired. They were checked out by the ambulance and given the OK, and we took the lifeboat man and the back to the boathouse. On Sunday, the 17th of July, there was a small boat got lost and ran out of fuel. The inshore lifeboat was tasked to locate them, and they were found drifting on the north side of the island at East Church Gap, which is not far from here. They were towed back to the Isle of Sheppey Sailing Club, where Coastguard rescue officers assisted in the recovery of their vessel, and clearly safety advice was given to the 3 persons on board. And it really is, one of my Coastguard, Scott again remarked, he said this incident highlights the need to ensure that spare fuel is taken when a vessel is launched at sea. And you'll remember the guy who went 3 times around the island with just 1 tank of fuel en route to Southampton that time and ran out of fuel. But that was a different story, and that got reported in all the national press. Finally, on Sunday the 17th of July, Sheppey Coastguards were tasked to investigate an empty vessel adrift off Warden Bay, and Whitstable Lifeboat were tasked to recover this vessel, which was a rib. We were also, the whole team was then tasked to undertake a shoreline search for potential missing crew. Now, 2 coastguards assisted the lifeboat to recover the vessel to shore, and during this recovery process, the friend of the vessel's owner confirmed he and the owner were okay, and in the process of arranging the recovery of this particular vessel using a jet ski. Now, it transpired that the owner had recently purchased the vessel and was unfamiliar with the engine, which had stopped, and the owner had secured the vessel using an anchor and returned to shore for assistance. Unfortunately, he hadn't secured it correctly, or it wasn't secure enough, and it drifted. So again, we passed on safety advice.
And we've had quite a few bits coming.
Yeah. Let's just... we had a phone call from Mr. Arness. He asked me about the cliffs, and are they safe now because we haven't had any rain? Well, unfortunately, no. The cliffs are never safe. Even if it's been raining, they're muddy and therefore prone to collapse. And even if it's been dry, they're still prone to collapse because they're dried out and they'll just collapse. So keep away, all seasons, keep away from the cliff edges. They're very difficult. They're very dangerous. I've also been asked how you become a coastguard. Well, basically you have to apply to become a coastguard, and we've just taken on 3 new coastguards, and they've just done all their basic competencies, and they will be now trained up over the next year or so in a range of skills which we do, from water rescue to cliff rescue to search and rescue to fast water rescue to mud rescue. But if you are interested, I'll give you my email address at the end of the show. You can always email me and I will pass it on to the relevant person. You've got these things, people, is cold water shock. Is the answer hyperthermia? That's from Daniel from Blue Boy. Not correct actually, Daniel. Hyperthermia is when you overheat. I think you're thinking about hypothermia with an O, spelt with an O, which is when you go cold. So hyperthermia is something, if you were on the Tour de France and you were clambering up that 2,000 metre mountain, it's something you would get because your core temperature would increase rather than decrease, and you'd pass out from basically becoming too hot. Is it only people that... This is another question. Do you have any special equipment, we've got the socks again, that you have to wear for your rescue? Yes, we do. We have a range of personal protective equipment which we have to wear. Obviously, we have safety goggles, we have proper overall systems, we have safety boots, we have helmets, we have to lots of harnesses, lots of all of that sort of safety equipment. So the answer to that is yes, we do have a range of equipment that we have to wear for rescues. Is it only people that get cold water shock, or can animals get it too? My dog jumped in the water, should I stop him? Well, the answer to that is I don't know, because there's no research being done in terms of cold water shock for animals. I make the assumption that their physiological characteristics are different to human beings, but there's nothing written down, as far as I know, about cold water shock for animals. But I suppose they can still get cold water shock. I can tell you this now, that the water is cold, because I went swimming in it today and it was cold, even though we're in July and it's a very warm day. Someone else has written, Blue Boy again. I live less than 5 minutes from the beach in Sheerness, and I've seen a lot of people thinking because the sea, it keeps refreshing, because the sea is calm, they can swim anywhere, especially when it's hot summer day. But do we still have a blue flag to tell people it's safe to swim? Well, the blue flag is nothing to do with the safety in terms of the actual water itself, or a blue. I'll correct myself there. The lifeguards put up the yellow and red flags, and that tells you about where they're monitoring it. A red flag tells you it's dangerous to swim in there because of the currents. A blue flag simply tells you about the quality of the water that you're swimming in. and I won't go into great depths because it's not very nice on the radio of what that quality is measured for, but it's something to do with sewerage and the actual percentage of sewerage in the water. And again, we won't go into great details, but I'm sure your listeners can think for themselves what that actually means. But to get a blue flag just simply means that the water is of a good quality. And if you go into the water now, you can actually see it's quite clear today. I could actually almost see to the bottom when I was standing up in it, or just over about 5 feet to the bottom. It was very clear today. But the flag, where you go and swim, if you want to be safe, you swim between the flags as designated by the lifeguards. And given the fact that they're on Sheerness, Minster and Laysdown beaches, there's no excuses for not observing their particular safety signs on that. One last one. It says, what's the funniest incident you've had to do with the Coast Guard? Well, I have to say there are three, and in reverse order. Coming in at number 3 is the gentleman who purchased a boat, never been on a boat before, always wanted a boat, and thought he would go from London to Southampton on one tank of fuel, because that's all he needed when he drove from London to Southampton. And he was told to keep the land on his right, and he would eventually reach Southampton. Well, that's a good trek. And he went round the Isle of Sheppey 3 times and ran out of fuel. Coming in at number 2 is the two gentlemen who said to 2 of my colleagues, they were about to launch a vessel, and they said to my colleagues, "Where's the water gone?" And my colleague said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the water was up to here yesterday," and they didn't know what a tide was, which is extraordinary to think that people are actually going to sea and launching a vessel and they don't know what a tide is. And but the best one of all for me was something that happened very about 5 or 6 years ago, up on these cliffs, Daniel, and that was the report of a plane on fire, which disappeared over the horizon and got sort of dimmer as it disappeared, and it was reported by 2 persons, and of course it turned out to be the setting sun. But there you go. That was an interesting one. Now, coming on to finally cold water shock, if I may, because it takes me about 2 minutes to say this. I mean, recent research has identified the fact that many people don't wear their life jackets because they think that falling in the water is an occurrence that they could relatively easily get through because they believe themselves to be strong swimmers, or that their crew would rapidly get them from the water. Now, just cast your mind back what I said earlier when Scott said this gentleman would have died, and the gentleman himself acknowledged he would have died if he didn't have his life jacket on. However, established science renders those beliefs questionable. Now, cold water shock is a leading cause of death that many people fail to appreciate. Many deaths recorded by coroners are normally attributed to either hypothermia, being cold, or drowning, when in actual fact the cause of death leading up could be something different. Now, this is based on the research of one individual, Professor Mike Timpton, who's written a seminal work called Essentials of Sea Survival, and he's quoted as saying, "If you are lucky enough to survive long enough to die of hypothermia, you've done very well. Most die in the first minute of immersion. It is cold water shock that tends to kill people around our shores." Now, what is it? It is the body's short-term involuntary response to being suddenly immersed in cold water. Now, if you remember, you all get into the sea. We go, ooh, ooh, and, we'll take that deep breath as you go in. Imagine just being thrown straight into cold waters. And the waters around the UK are officially cold. They're only between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius. And when the body enters this cold water environment, there are a number of physiological responses. The sudden lowering of skin temperature is one of the most profound stimuli that the body can encounter, and the responses tend to be short-lived but threaten survival. I've seen cold water shock being demonstrated on Sharon Davis and Duncan Goodwin, who were both Olympic swimmers in their day, and both of them, once they were immersed into cold water, just as we get round our coasts, had difficulty swimming after about a minute. That's what it can do to you, cold water shock. And the responses are, first of all, you get closure of the blood vessels in the skin, which results in increased resistance to blood flow. The heart then has to work harder, and as blood pressure increases. At the same time, there is a gasp response, which can result in water being breathed in rather than air. Concurrently, the breathing rate changes dramatically. It can increase by as much as tenfold. All these responses contribute to a feeling of panic and are more difficult to manage if no life jacket is worn and the casualty is struggling to stay afloat. After a while, the body gains control of itself and much of the excessive reaction reduces. However, coping with cold water shock certainly takes its toll in terms of long-term survivability. Unsurprisingly, one effect of cold water shock is to induce a heart attack, even in relatively healthy and relatively young people. Hence, it can induce that a heart attack in it. So basically, the message from this cold water shock is you make sure you wear a life jacket, which allows you to, if you pardon the pun, weather the cold water shock and prolong your survival long enough for you to be recovered either by your own boat or by the rescue services. Right, now I said I was going to give out my email address just in case anyone. So if you've got a pen and pencil, it's Ian Goodwin, that's IANGOODWIN, that's Ian Goodwin at line1.net. That's LINEONE.net, line1.net. And if you buzz me on that, I'll pass it on to the relevant person in the team. And finally, all I'll say to you, Daniel, is thank you very much, and thank you to all your very active people this evening. We've had lots of phone calls, lots of questions, which has certainly kept me on my toes. And as I said earlier, I'm now off to enjoy my favourite sweet. I've got my cherries from Brogdale yesterday, and I'm going to have them with lashings of custard now. Thank you very much, Dan.
No, as always, thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. And of course, once again, thank you to everyone who contacted us during our section with Ian here at the Monday Night Community Show.